the horror. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Gershon. This week we are doing Franchise Frenzy, the Part 6's. And this series was created by the Horror Man and Horrific Nightmares JM. So let's get into it, shall we? This should be interesting. In at number 18 is Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare. This is the only one in the franchise that I just hate. It's a real rough watch for me. I did see it in the theaters, and I came close to walking out because I was just so saddened to see how far the franchise had fallen and how it just had become a complete farce at this point. Just a parody of what once was with the original film. And I was pissed to see if this was going to be the last film in the franchise, but luckily it wasn't. They were able to redeem themselves with the next entry, but yeah, I couldn't stand the makeup on Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger this time. It just looked like a pizza face. And just way too many one-liners, too many quips from Freddy. Freddy just wasn't even scary anymore at this point. And I thought it was real silly at the end where they were like, hey kids, put on your 3D glasses at the end. And they had a really terrible 3D sequence with awful special effects. Super cheesy. And film has a decent cast with the Yaphet Kotto there. And you got Alice Cooper playing Freddy's father, which I thought that aspect of the film was interesting. I would have liked to see more of that, but yeah, a lot of cheesy cameos, and it's just really bad. Next up, we have Leprechaun Back to the Hood. This is one of the only times where I can think of them having a sequel within the sequel, like the sequel to the sequel, but it's the 6th film in the franchise. Yeah, definitely not one of my favorites. It's got its moments, a couple funny parts, but yeah, it's pretty bad at this point, you know. They should probably end the franchise at this point, I thought, but, you know, it still went on for a little bit. Next up, we have Hellraiser Hellseeker. And this is the film where we finally did get Ashley Lawrence returning to this series. You would think they might be able to save the franchise with having, like, a couple great stars like that. And once again, you have Doug Bradley returning as Pinhead. But, it's a real rough one. It's a real bad one, unfortunately. Yeah. Hellraiser Hellseeker, definitely not a memorable film in the franchise, except for the fact that Ashley Lawrence returns, but she can't save this one, unfortunately. Next up, we have Alien vs. Predator Requiem. Yeah, most people would say this is the worst in the franchise, and I'd have to agree. I have the same complaint that everybody does when it comes to this film, is it's so dark that you just can't see what the hell's going on. It's not a good thing. It's like, I'd like to see what's going on. You got these two classic icons of horror and sci-fi battling it out. I want to see what's going on, but you can't see the action because literally it's too dark. Next up, we have The Curse of the Puppet Master, which, yeah, not one of my favorites. I had become burnt out with the franchise at this point. You know, I feel like they needed to do something to breathe new life into it, which thankfully they did in the next one, I have to say. But yeah, Curse of the Puppet Master, not one of my favorites. Next up, we have Resident Evil, the final chapter. It wasn't exactly the final chapter of the franchise, and But it does seem to be the final of the franchise with Mila Jovovich in the lead role of Alice. But I have heard differently at this point. I heard that she might return to the franchise and they might keep it going, but this was not a good way to end the franchise at all. I feel it's definitely the worst film in the franchise. It's just so ridiculous at this point. There's flying dragon monsters. Like, what the hell is going on? Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, in the end, it does kind of tie everything together pretty nicely, but yeah, it's just too over the top for me and too ridiculous. Next up, we have The Curse of Chucky, which definitely is a step up from Seed of Chucky, which I feel is the worst film in the franchise, but yeah, it was a straight-to-DVD film. Yeah, it's alright. It's a decent movie. It's definitely, like I said, it's a step up from Seed of Chucky. Definitely better, but at the same time, it definitely feels like a much lower budget film, where it is straight to DVD, and you can tell it's a lower budget. But it does make the series more horror centric, for sure. It's not as comedy horror as Seed of Chucky was. It's definitely more towards the horror route, which is a good sign for the series. Next up, we have Survival of the Dead, which is an interesting one. This was the final film in George Romero's Dead franchise, as far as being directed by George Romero, of course. I've heard talks of there being one that he had planned, that he had written before he died, called Twilight of the Dead, which may see the light of day at some point, but this is the last film that he directed in the series, and not the best movie in the world, but it has some interesting aspects. I like the idea of them being on this island where there's this different groups of people, these different groups of families that are kind of feuding with each other, and and of course you got the living dead in the background to foil their plans as well. Kind of reminds me of The Walking Dead in a way, with the humans being the real threat, where the zombies are just kind of there. Which is funny because George Romero famously said that he did not like the Walking Dead series. But, yeah, it definitely has elements of The Walking Dead, though. Next up, we have The Nun, which I do feel is a solid film in the Conjuring franchise. It's a nice spin-off from the Conjuring series. I think it's definitely pretty scary, and the nun character is used very well here, and I think it's a solid entry in the series. Next up, we have Saw 6. Yes, definitely a typical Saw film, and yeah, it's solid enough, decent watch for sure. Next up, we have kind of a controversial one in the Hammer Frankenstein series, The Horror of Frankenstein, where they actually replaced Peter Cushing as the Baron Victor Frankenstein, and they decided to do a reboot with The Horror of Frankenstein, having Ralph Bates come in and play the much younger Victor Frankenstein, and it's almost like a remake of The Curse of Frankenstein in a way. There's definitely some more humor in this film, which I kind of liked, actually. And you have the beautiful Veronica Carlson and Kate O'Mara, and that can't hurt. It's having two beautiful vixens of horror. Yeah, I think it's solid, and I think you have the most brutal monster probably ever in the history of Frankenstein, as the monster this time is played by none other than David Prowse. Yes, Darth Vader himself. And man, he's brutal. So that's kind of what I like about this film is I like some of the humor, and yeah, I think Ralph Bates does a great job. You can never replace Peter Cushing as Victor Frankenstein, no way. But Ralph Bates does a damn good job, and I do enjoy this film. Next up, we have Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning, which is the sequel to the remake from 2003. Or is it a prequel to the remake? Yeah, I guess it's more of a prequel to the remake. But, yeah, definitely a solid entry in the franchise. One of my favorites. Really well done, really, really brutal. And it's interesting seeing the background of Leatherface. I liked seeing him working for the slaughterhouse, and and man, that scene where he just bashes the dude with the hammer, with the sledgehammer. It's so brutal. Yeah, love the mask in this film that Leatherface has too, and of course you got R. Lee Ermey returning as the evil sheriff. Definitely a solid entry in the series. I enjoy it. Next up, we have Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. And yeah, this is the producer's cut, and I do actually prefer the producer's cut. To me, it makes more sense than the theatrical version. I've just felt like the theatrical version is a complete mess. And I didn't like the film at the time when I went to see it in the theater, but over the years I have grown to enjoy it. I do see what people enjoy. It definitely has some great Halloween atmosphere, and the atmosphere in general is really good, It's got some nasty kills. Michael's really brutal this time, and yeah, and you get in the Curse of Michael Myers' producer's cut, you get more of Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, because this was the final performance of Donald Pleasance, so I felt like he was very underutilized in the theatrical version, so it's nice to watch the producer's cut, which he is more involved in. Especially the ending, the controversial ending, where Dr. Loomis is infected by the curse of Michael Myers. Next up, we have the 6th film in the Hammer Dracula series, released in 1970, the same year as Taste the Blood of Dracula. But this one came out a little bit later. I have to say, I think this is the most underrated film in the Hammer Dracula series. Because Christopher Lee as Count Dracula has a lot more to do here. He has a lot more dialogue, and with Christopher Lee, I think that's definitely a great thing, because he has such a commanding presence and a commanding voice as well. I love seeing him have more dialogue here. And he's just great. He just chews the scenery. He's so intimidating. He's so menacing. But you also get to see the more kind of debonair, suave, and charming side of Dracula here, which I really enjoy. On the downside, we do get some really horribly rendered bats. They look so bad. The prosthetics is so bad. I think you even see the strings at some point. But yeah, really enjoy the story. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, this is a really good one, I think. Next up, we have the most recent film in the Scream franchise, and that is Scream 6. A lot of controversy about this one because of the fact that the two main stars, Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera, we found out that they are not going to return for the 7th film in the franchise. So it's like, where does it go from here? But with that being said, this is also the only Scream film not to feature Neve Campbell. Because they couldn't agree on money. They couldn't agree on terms for her to return. So she was not in this one. They do mention her, though. And you do have Courtney Cox returning as Gale Weathers, of course. But I think this is a really good entry in the franchise. So regardless of not having Neve Campbell, I think it's really solid. I love the New York City setting, and they do a lot of cool things with that. And there's a lot of cool twists and turns as well. And yeah, I really enjoy Scream 6. I think it's a solid entry in the series. Although the ending is a little bit wonky and a little bit campy, a little bit over the top with the killer reveal here, but nonetheless, I think it's a solid film in the series. Next up, we have House of Frankenstein, which is such a fun film because you have this big monster mashup. You have the Frankenstein's monster, played by Glenn Strange this time around. And Boris Karloff actually is in this film as well. But he plays kind of more the mad scientist role here. And you got Lon Chaney Jr. returning as the Wolfman, doing a kick-ass job as always. And you do have Dracula in this film as well, played by John Carradine this time. It's such a fun film in the series. It's such a great monster mashup and all the classic gothic tone of the Universal monster film. So yeah, it's just a blast. Next up, you have at number 2, The First Omen, which is the newest film in the Omen franchise. I don't have that on DVD or Blu-ray yet because it hasn't been released yet. It is out on streaming services, but I'm waiting for the physical release. But I think it's a very worthy entry in the series, and it's a great prequel as well to Damien Thorne coming into play. I love how they tie it all together with the original film, but at the same time bringing its own flavor as well. Definitely brings back the suspense that the series is known for. Great cast, great acting, great tension and drama. And the religious aspects are so well utilized as they are in the franchise. That's one of the things I love about it, is it's so like accurate, it's so like realistic in that sense. But a lot of great special effects too as well. I just think it's a really well made film, and it's really scary. And yeah, there's some crazy twists in this movie that really make you spin your head around, and I love that, you know. Especially the way the Catholic Church is used here. It's like a conspiracy, you know, it's crazy. Love it. And in that number 1 is Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. One of my favorite films in the Friday the 13th franchise. It's got some good humor, and it's a lot of fun. It even breaks the fourth wall at one point. You know, there's some meta humor in there where it's kind of poking fun at the slasher genre and at the Friday the 13th franchise in general. But it's never to the point of being like a horror comedy or anything. It's very much a horror film still, because Jason is taken very seriously at all times. And there's some great kills in here, even though the MPAA hacked up the kills a little bit in order for them to reach an R rating. But still cool nonetheless, and yeah, I love Tom Matthews as Tommy Jarvis, too. I love his interaction with Jason's great final act. And, yeah, I think this film's awesome. It's one of the best in the franchise. Great direction, too. Thought this would be a good opportunity to show off my C.J. Graham autograph. Yeah, I did get to meet C.J. Graham. He's an awesome dude, and he's huge. Yeah. My favorite Jason in the franchise. I just feel like he had the perfect look of the character, the perfect size, and he had the mannerisms down pat. Just a great performance of Jason in general. And he's awesome. And that's it for Franchise Frenzy, the Part 6's. Once again, this series was created by Horrific Nightmares JM and The Horror Man. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Gershon, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared. Good evening, folks, and we got some brand new merchandise for you over at www.thehorrorkona.com, and that's CONA.com. Representing the Horror Corner. Great new design. We got the Morbid Hour live stream there, you got the Horror Hangout live stream there, and you got my nemesis, the Dark Fate. So grab your t-shirt over at www.thehorrorkona.com. And we also got this beautiful new mug. Look at that. Very, very cool. Thought that came out really nice. So grab your merchandise today over at www.thehorrorkona.com.